Have you ever heard of the Gray Pope? A figure who never appears in official documents of the Catholic Church, but whose existence is whispered among the dark corridors of the Vatican. He does not display the glory of the White Pope, the visible leader of the Church, nor the intellectual influence of the Black Pope, commander of the Jesuits. Even so, they say he is the true strategist behind the institution's most critical decisions. But who is this mysterious character? Could he be a real person, a role passed down from generation to generation, or just a myth reflecting the backstage of power and faith within the Church? You can call it paranoia. I call it vision. This is Light, better known as L, and together we're going to break the code they've hidden from you. After all, what do we really know about the Gray Pope? The story of the Gray Pope begins in the shadows, where rumors and speculations fill the gaps left by the absence of official records. Funny how the darkest stories are always the most alluring. Are we seeking the truth, or is the mystery itself more exciting? Although his name was never recorded in the Vatican's annals, the idea of his existence arises in encrypted letters, intriguing correspondence, and accounts from insiders who claim to have witnessed his influence. But what makes this figure so unique? Perhaps it's the fact that he never sought public recognition. He is described as the one who maintains the Church's stability, acting as a sort of invisible guardian, wielding enough power to shape crucial decisions without ever being seen. Unlike the White Pope, the visible head of the Catholic Church, and the Black Pope, with his intellectual and strategic leadership of the Jesuit order, the Gray Pope does not hold an official title. His strength does not lie in sermons or dogmas, but in a deep understanding of the Vatican's inner workings and the near-total control he exercises over political and religious decisions. Have you ever wondered how such complex decisions are made without appearing to cause internal division? Maybe the Gray Pope is the answer. The theory of his existence gained traction especially during times of crisis, such as the Protestant Reformation, when the Church seemed on the brink of collapse. Accounts of a silent strategist began circulating, pointing to someone operating behind the scenes to ensure that Catholic unity was preserved even in the face of the greatest threats. How could a faceless figure wield so much power? That question still echoes in theological and historical debates. Some scholars suggest that the Gray Pope is not a single individual, but rather a title or role passed among select members of an inner circle of the Vatican. This circle, composed of cardinals and strategic advisors, would be responsible for making the most delicate decisions, shielding the Church from external and internal pressures. Others, however, argue that he is a single individual whose anonymity is the key to his power. There are signs that this figure was active in critical moments of history, such as the Council of Trent, 1545 to 1563, when the Church was facing the advance of Protestantism. Sources indicate that while theological debates took place publicly, an invisible architect was negotiating political alliances with Catholic monarchs, ensuring military and moral support for the cause. Was the Gray Pope responsible for these negotiations? What's most curious is how this figure seems to transcend time. In different eras, there are reports of someone with similar characteristics, a nameless strategist whose ability to manipulate internal and external politics preserves the Church during periods of crisis. This reinforces the theory that the Gray Pope is not a person, but a function perpetuated over the centuries. Why, then, are there no direct mentions of him in official documents? That is one of the questions fueling the mystery. Some argue that the Gray Pope himself would have an interest in keeping his existence hidden, erasing any trace that might reveal his role. Others suggest that the Church, aware of the controversy his influence would spark, preferred to eliminate records to protect its image. The relationship between the Gray Pope and the Vatican raises another important question. To what extent would he be responsible for morally questionable decisions? During the Counter-Reformation, for example, there were censorships, persecutions, and even executions to guarantee Catholic unity. Were these actions carried out under his supervision? Or was he merely seeking to preserve the faith at any cost? Despite his supposed lack of ambition for notoriety, the Gray Pope stands out as the link connecting the spiritual to the political. He represents a church that is not merely a faith-based institution, but also a political force capable of shaping the fate of entire nations. It's intriguing to imagine that, while official history was unfolding, a hidden figure could have been guiding its course. If he really existed, would it be fair to consider him a savior or a manipulator? Perhaps it's this duality that makes the Grey Pope so fascinating. His ability to remain invisible while exercising so much power is undoubtedly his greatest weapon. But what if he's nothing more than a myth, a projection of our fears and curiosities about what happens behind the scenes of power? In that case, the Grey Pope would be a symbol, a metaphor for the hidden forces that inevitably exist in any organization as old and complex as the Catholic Church. What we know so far is that the Grey Pope personifies the idea that, even in faith, there is intricate politics at play. His actions, real or imagined, show that the Vatican is more than a symbol of spirituality. It is also a strategic power center. The Council of Trent, 1545 to 1563, marked one of the most turbulent eras in the history of the Catholic Church. Convened in response to the Protestant Reformation, which was dividing Europe and threatening the Church's supremacy, this event was described as a forum for theological debates. But were its decisions really made solely in the public meetings of cardinals and theologians? Or was there an invisible force orchestrating things behind the scenes? There are intriguing accounts that mention a figure known as the Voice from the Shadows, whose presence was allegedly felt at key moments of the council. This figure, associated with the Grey Pope, is said to have been crucial in formulating strategies that not only allowed the Church to survive, but also solidify its authority. He knew that the battle against Protestantism could not be won with theological arguments alone. It was necessary to manipulate political alliances, silence dissenters, and above all, ensure that Catholic power remained intact. Among the actions attributed to the Grey Pope is the negotiation of agreements with Catholic monarchs like Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor. These agreements were essential to secure the military and political support needed to contain the spread of Protestantism. But how were these alliances formed? Documents suggest that the Vatican offered incentives such as lands, privileges, and even spiritual forgiveness to ensure these leaders' loyalty. Was this the work of a backstage strategist? Another crucial factor was the creation of the Index of Forbidden Books, a list of works considered heretical that threatened the Church's authority. While the cardinals debated doctrines, the Grey Pope is said to have identified the need to control the intellectual sphere. He understood that ideas can be as dangerous as swords, perhaps even more so. Banning books by figures like Luther and Calvin was not just censorship. It was a strategic act to shape thought and preserve the unity of faith. Controlling what people read is controlling how they think. Genius, certainly. Ethical, not so much. And what about the Shield of Doctrines? This secret tribunal, mentioned in coded letters from that period, is said to have been formed under the Grey Pope's guidance. Its mission was to identify and eliminate internal threats to the Church before they became public. Unlike the Inquisition, which operated more visibly, the Shield of Doctrines worked in the shadows, dealing with dissenters discreetly. Could its effectiveness be due to the absence of scrutiny? Despite his actions being morally ambiguous, the Grey Pope seems to have been guided by a clear objective: to protect the Church at all costs. When we consider the magnitude of the crises faced during the Council of Trent, it's not hard to imagine that such a figure was necessary. How do you maintain stability in an era of so many divisions? Some criticize the creation of the Index of Forbidden Books, arguing that it stifled intellectual and scientific progress. After all, works by figures like Copernicus and Galileo were also on the list, delaying advancements that could have benefited humanity. But the Grey Pope saw knowledge as a double-edged sword. He knew that allowing questions about doctrine could compromise the Church's authority. Was he a villain for prioritizing institutional survival over progress? The Council of Trent's success is undeniable. It reaffirmed dogmas, strengthened clerical discipline, and laid the foundations for the Counter-Reformation. However, many historians argue that these achievements would not have been possible without the clandestine negotiations and strategic decisions attributed to the Grey Pope. He understood that to win a war, one must fight on multiple fronts, and he seemed to be on all of them. But did he act alone? Some letters indicate the existence of an inner council, a group of loyal advisors who helped execute his strategies. This group may have been a precursor to the Vatican's secret committees, showing that the Grey Pope not only shaped the Church of his time, but also its future. While official history extols the Council's theological debates, the actions attributed to the Grey Pope cast a dark light on what really happened behind closed doors. What else might have been decided far from the public eye? Could the Council have been just the tip of the iceberg in a series of carefully planned moves? Looking at the lasting impact of the Council of Trent, it's hard to ignore the possibility that the Grey Pope played a crucial role. His actions, visible only to those in the closest inner circle, show that real power often lies in the shadows. Was the Grey Pope the hidden hero who saved the Church from imminent collapse, or the manipulator who sacrificed ethical values for power? And more importantly, could he still be operating behind the scenes today? Hidden beneath the ground of Vatican City, the secret archives are among the most mysterious places on the planet. They hold centuries of documents, letters, and records that recount the history of the Catholic Church and, consequently, much of Western history. But what exactly is hidden there? And more importantly, how did the Grey Pope use this trove of information as a strategic weapon? Many believe the secret archives are not merely a historical repository, but also a tool of control. Reports suggest that the Grey Pope had unrestricted access to these documents and used them to consolidate his power. Apocryphal texts, such as the Gospel of Judas, which offers alternative views on early Christianity, are said to be stored there. Why keep these works hidden? Is it an attempt to protect the faithful, or to prevent divergent narratives from undermining the Church's authority? Furthermore, the archives contain detailed records of the Church's diplomatic and political correspondence over the centuries. Such information would grant the Grey Pope unprecedented power to manipulate alliances and neutralize threats. Imagine having at your disposal the secrets of Europe's kings, their weaknesses and ambitions. This knowledge would not only be useful, it would be devastating in the hands of someone with clear strategic objectives. One intriguing example of how the archives may have been used is the period of the Western Schism, when 2, and later 3, popes simultaneously claimed the throne of St. Peter. According to some theories, a document known as Codex Vigilus, supposedly hidden in the secret archives, describes how the Grey Pope of that time used historical precedents to justify his actions and restore the Church's unity. Did he really shape the outcome of this crisis behind closed doors? But the secret archives also give rise to darker theories. Some believe they hold secrets that go beyond the Church's history, such as records of extraterrestrial contacts, documents outlining global conspiracies, and even evidence of secret societies. Although these ideas are fascinating, do they not actually reflect our fear and fascination with what we cannot access? Controlling information is undoubtedly one of the most powerful tools for any ruler, and the Grey Pope seemed to understand this better than anyone. Information is currency. Whoever controls the secrets controls everything. He knew that knowledge, when carefully managed, can mold narratives, consolidate powers, and rewrite history. But did he act solely to defend the Church, or also to hide inconvenient truths? Interestingly, the secret archives are not as inaccessible as their name suggests. Researchers with the right credentials can request access to certain documents, but only a fraction of the collection is available. This raises another question. What exactly is hidden in the restricted areas? Why have certain texts never seen the light of day? Did the Grey Pope personally decide what must remain secret? One of the most famous cases associated with the archives is the Gospel of Judas, which portrays Judas Iscariot not as a traitor, but as a divine instrument necessary to fulfill Jesus' destiny. If such a text had been widely known during the Church's heyday, it could have profoundly shaken the theological foundations of the Catholic faith. Did the Grey Pope decide to bury it in the archives forever? Another fascinating aspect is how these records were used in political negotiations. It's said that the Vatican possessed compromising information about monarchs and Protestant leaders, information that could be used as currency in delicate situations. During the Reformation, for example, the Vatican is believed to have used such data to obtain strategic concessions. Was the Grey Pope behind these operations? But the use of the secret archives was not limited to the distant past. In the 20th century, during World War II, Documents stored there said to have been used to protect the Vatican from possible Nazi invasions. These archives, full of valuable information, will have given the Vatican the power to bargain for its neutrality. If the Grey Pope still existed, did he play a crucial role in this diplomatic game? The influence of the secret archives is not only historical, it is ongoing. To this day, the Vatican maintains strict control over what may or may not be disclosed. This leads to a disquieting question. If so much care is taken to protect these documents, what truths might be hidden there? Could they be the key to understanding the Church's true power? The mystery of the Vatican's secret archives is one of the central pieces of the Grey Pope enigma. After all, who else could access and manipulate such information so skillfully? Was he a guardian of history or a manipulator of destiny? Or perhaps both? And if these documents were ever fully open to the public, would we discover something that would rock not only the foundations of the Church, but also the world as we know it? During World War II, the Vatican declared an official position of neutrality, but behind the scenes, its actions were far more complex. Neutrality is always a beautiful facade for those who play on both sides. And who can blame them? Survival is rule number one. Accounts suggest that this neutrality was actually a carefully orchestrated smokescreen. And who might have been the strategist behind this ambiguous stance? For many, the Grey Pope, or someone in a similar role, was the true architect of the Church's clandestine operations during the conflict. Europe was in flames, and the Vatican, as the spiritual heart of Catholicism, found itself in a delicate position. With the Nazis controlling much of the continent and the Allies advancing slowly, the Church's survival as an institution was at stake. In this scenario, the Grey Pope is said to have acted decisively, balancing conflicting interests to protect both the Vatican structure and its global influence. One of the most notable actions attributed to him was the use of monasteries and churches as refuges for persecuted Jews. In many cases, entire families were hidden within the very walls of the Vatican, shielded from Nazi capture. Some of these operations, such as the escape network known as the Monastery Route, were allegedly supervised directly by Vatican agents under instructions from a strategic leader. Was this leader the Grey Pope? Additionally, there are records that the Church played a crucial role in creating escape routes for political refugees, including those hunted by authoritarian regimes. This rescue network not only saved lives, but also bolstered the Church's image as a humanitarian force during a time of crisis. But was this purely a moral decision, or part of a larger plan to secure future allies? Another fascinating aspect is the Vatican's involvement in safeguarding its cultural heritage. Ancient manuscripts, religious artifacts, and priceless works of art were transferred to safe locations, often under secret escort. Some of these treasures were sent to Switzerland, away from the reach of occupying forces. With his strategic vision, the Grey Pope may have recognized that preserving these items was not just about culture, but also symbolic power. After all, whoever controls history controls the narrative. However, not all actions attributed to the Vatican during the war are viewed favorably. There is evidence that Church representatives, possibly under the Grey Pope's guidance, held negotiations with Nazi authorities. In exchange for the protection of Catholic properties and institutions, certain agreements may have been forged, raising questions about the ethical boundaries of these actions. Could the Grey Pope have seen these concessions as a necessary evil to protect the Church? The Vatican's relationship with the Nazi regime is one of the most controversial chapters of World War II history. Although Pope Pius XII is often mentioned as the central figure of this period, theories suggest he may have been influenced, or even instructed, by a more obscure figure, the Grey Pope. This figure is said to have worked to ensure the Vatican maintained its official neutrality while secretly operating on multiple fronts. One of the most intriguing elements of this era is the Vatican's supposed intelligence network. It's said the Church had agents embedded on both sides of the conflict, gathering information that would help shape its decisions. This flow of strategic data would have allowed the Grey Pope to anticipate critical moves and adjust his actions accordingly. Did he use this information to negotiate with both the Allies and the Axis simultaneously? Though many of these actions saved lives and protected the Church's legacy, they also raise questions about the morality of the choices made. In times of war, the lines between right and wrong can blur. Did the Grey Pope act pragmatically, prioritizing the Church's survival at the expense of absolute ethical principles? After the war, the Vatican emerged with its reputation largely intact, an impressive feat given the circumstances. Some theories suggest this was a direct result of the Grey Pope's actions, as he worked tirelessly to maintain a balance between religious and political interests. His backstage maneuvers may have ensured that, even amid global chaos, the Church remained a respected force. But what secrets still remain? Many documents about the Vatican's role in the war are still classified in the secret archives. Could these archives hold the key to fully understanding the Grey Pope's actions during this period? And if revealed, might they change our perception of the Church's role in World War II? What we do know is that, in times of crisis, the Vatican displayed an impressive capacity for adaptation and resilience. Was this the work of an invisible strategist, or just the outcome of collective decisions by an institution that has survived for millennia? The figure of the Grey Pope, real or symbolic, forces us to confront these questions. Is today's Vatican still following the strategic lessons learned back then, or is the Grey Pope's legacy merely a distant shadow from a complex past? The Society of Jesus, founded by Ignatius of Loyola in 1540, has always played a pivotal role within the Catholic Church. Renowned for their intellectual discipline, missionary work, and political influence, the Jesuits became one of the Vatican's most powerful arms. Yet the relationship between Jesuit leadership, symbolized by the Black Pope, and the enigmatic Grey Pope is layered and complex. These two archetypes of power within the Church are both strategic allies and silent rivals. During the Counter-Reformation, the Jesuits stood out for their ability to reclaim territories lost to Protestantism. Their global network of schools, universities, and missions provided a powerful platform to disseminate Catholic doctrine and consolidate its influence. However, there is evidence that while the Black Pope led visible operations, the Grey Pope was working behind the scenes, devising strategies and coordinating actions that went beyond Jesuit reach. This raises an interesting question. How independent were the Jesuits, and to what extent were their actions shaped by this invisible figure? Historical sources suggest that the Grey Pope used the Jesuits as instruments of his broader vision for the Church. He recognized the value of Jesuit work in places like Bohemia and Poland, where Protestant influence was strong. Yet, at the same time, the Grey Pope seemed concerned about the order's growing power. The Jesuits, with their self-sufficient network and their vow of direct obedience to the White Pope, represented a force difficult to control. Did the Grey Pope see them as a valuable tool or a potential threat? This tension intensified in the 18th century when the Jesuits became so powerful that they began to unsettle Europe's monarchies. Under pressure from Catholic kings, Pope Clement XIV suppressed the order in 1773, an act many believe was encouraged by the Grey Pope. Documents from that time indicate that concerns were growing within the Vatican that the Jesuits were becoming a church within the Church, wielding too much autonomy. If the Grey Pope truly supported this decision, he may have seen the suppression as a means to rebalance power within the institution. Even after their official dissolution, Jesuit influence never completely disappeared. When the order was restored in 1814, its role in the Church seemed more tightly controlled. Some theorists claim the Grey Pope continued to oversee Jesuit operations, ensuring that they aligned with the Vatican's strategic interests. This cooperative but monitored relationship exemplifies the delicate balance between collaboration and rivalry that has characterized their interactions over the centuries. Another area where the relationship between the Grey Pope and the Black Pope is intriguing is the matter of knowledge and intelligence. The Jesuits have always been known for their global information network. With such an intelligence system, they were the religious equivalent of a spy agency. The Grey Pope must have loved it or feared it. Their schools and missions functioned not only as religious centers, but also as data collection points about the political and cultural conditions of various regions. Many believe that this information was shared with the Vatican, but also that the Grey Pope may have used the Jesuits to gather crucial insights without revealing his true intentions. Was he manipulating the Jesuits to obtain critical information? On the other hand, there is evidence that the Jesuits did not always follow the Grey Pope's directives. Their financial independence and political connections often put them at odds with the broader goals of the Church. Some historians speculate that in times of crisis, the Grey Pope acted to restrain or even sabotage Jesuit initiatives that did not align with his plans. Could the temporary suppression of the order be just one example of this? A particularly interesting episode is the role of the Jesuits in Latin America. During the 17th and 18th centuries, Jesuit missions in the region, known as reductions, grew into centers of considerable power. These communities were self-sufficient and often operated independently of colonial governments. Rumor has it that the Grey Pope viewed these missions as a potential risk, fearing they could set a dangerous precedent of autonomy within the Church. Modern times brought new challenges to the relationship between the Grey Pope and the Jesuits. In the 20th century, the order played a significant role in social justice movements, frequently clashing with authoritarian regimes. Many of these movements were deemed controversial within the Vatican, especially when they put the Jesuits in direct conflict with policies supported by conservative church sectors. Did the Grey Pope continue to monitor and adjust the order's role in these contexts? The current balance of power between the Grey Pope and the Black Pope remains a mystery. Although the Jesuits are still a formidable force, their role appears more restricted than in past centuries. Is this the result of lessons learned from their historical rivalry? Or does the Grey Pope's influence still operate to keep the order in check? The relationship between the Grey Pope and the Jesuits is a fascinating reflection of the Vatican's internal dynamics. Are they strategic allies or silent rivals? Or perhaps both, depending on the circumstances? What seems certain is that this complex interplay shaped the Church at crucial moments, ensuring its survival in a constantly changing world. The Grey Pope is a figure who dwells in the shadows of history, whether as a captivating myth or a real force that has shaped the course of the Catholic Church over the centuries. His actions, attributed to an invisible strategist, challenge the conventional understanding of power, showing that the most important decisions are often not made in the spotlight, but behind closed doors. Was he a protector of the faith or a pragmatic manipulator who prioritized institutional survival above all else? His influence, seen only in its outcomes, raises questions about the true nature of power within the Vatican. More than a person or a position, the Grey Pope may be a symbol of the hidden forces operating behind any great institution. His actions, real or imagined, continue to inspire theories, debates, and reflections on the limits between faith and politics. The truth is out there, hidden between the lines of a system nobody dares to question. But if you're ready to see beyond what they show you, comment, and share this video with those who also need to wake up. Tell me, which mystery should we unravel in the next episode? Together, we'll break the codes they try to keep secret. This is only the beginning of the hidden secret.